Hello and welcome into this week's edition of the ARCA Menard Series East Rewind Show. I'm Garth Allen. This is Racing News Now. I know you haven't seen me much for a couple weeks other than the Rookie Stripes podcast. I apologize for that. It has been a crazy couple of weeks. But we're back talking ARCA this week for the General Tire 125 from the Dover Motor Speedway. And honestly, this race I think was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. We had a lot of comers and goers in this race. A lot of that early on was because of the weird starting lineup that we had, as this race was rained from Friday into Saturday. So starting lineup based off of last year's owner points. So a lot of the drivers in the field weren't in last year's owner points, so they ended up in the back. So you had a lot of guys starting up front that you normally wouldn't. William Sawalich, because he's in the 18, started up front. That wasn't really a surprise because the 18. But then you had Zachary Tinkle starting in second. Third starter was Tim Monroe. CJ McLaughlin started in fourth. Brad Smith fifth. Ed Pompa sixth. That was your starting lineup. And then you finally got into the guys that you would expect to be up front, with Sean Hingorani starting seventh. LeVar Scott eighth. Jake Finch started ninth. Connor Jones started 10th. So you had to go a little ways back to find those fast cars. They found their way to the front fairly quickly, but at the same time, you still definitely had some movers and lots of shaking up of the lineup, especially early on in the race. William Sawalich, although he started on pole, only led the first two laps, immediately lost the lead to LeVar Scott, and continued to fall from there. William Sawalich was not a factor in this race at all, which I think surprised a lot of us, me included, as we've come to expect the 18 car to be the car, especially in the East Series, but ARCA as a whole, but especially in the East Series. You expect that 18 car to just run away with things. We've seen that the past however many years with Ty Gibbs and Sammy Smith, and we saw it at Five Flags with William Sawalich. So we expected that to continue. I'm not really sure what the deal was with Sawalich in this race, but he was not a win contender in the slightest in this race, which was very refreshing to see. Now, the Venturini Motorsports cars, on the other hand, were very fast in this race. Connor Jones led a good chunk early in this race, actually led 30 laps to start the race before losing the lead to his teammate Jake Finch, who ended up really dominating this race, leading 89 of the race's total 127 laps. Yes, 127, as we did go into overtime. The only caution in this race that was not for a scheduled break was at lap 116 when Connor Jones, who had fallen a lap down in the mid-portions of the race, had some issues on the first brake caution, went a lap down, and never could quite recover from it, although I think late he was showing he was still the fastest car in the race, was actually up with the leaders trying to unlap himself with like 10 laps to go, and then blows a right front tire hard into the outside wall in turns 3, as we see the replay right here. Very hard impact into that outside wall in turn 3. Luckily, he was able to walk away, albeit a little gingerly, a little worried about his condition after that, but he was able to walk away nonetheless. But it was a very hard hit for the driver of that 25 car, Connor Jones. Now, that set up a 2-lap shootout to the finish between what had been the two fastest cars in this race after you really eliminated Connor Jones from contention, and that being the 20 of Jake Finch and the 17 of Landon Lewis. Now, you might be asking, where was Sean Hingorani in this, the winner of the last two West races? He was in this race, wasn't he? He was, as he is running both the East and the West full schedules this season. Unfortunately, he had some issues from the very beginning, had some engine issues, was behind the wall for a good chunk of the beginning of the race, could not get the car fired for some reason at the beginning of the race, but was able to get out there later in the race and did log some laps, did end up with a top 10 finish, but unfortunately was not a factor in this race at all. So, came down to a 2-lap shootout. Jake Finch, Landon Lewis. Landon Lewis had been catching Jake Finch in those final laps before Connor Jones had his accident. It was setting up to be a very good, exciting finish between those two to see who would end up winning this race. Now, we got a different exciting finish between those two than I think what we would have gotten, but nonetheless, 2-lap shootout between those two to decide to win was very exciting. They were leaning on each other for those entire 2 laps. Very good, hard racing. Neither one of them wrecked the other. It was just good, hard racing. the kind of racing that you love to see in NASCAR. Jake Finch, though, was able to come away with the win in this one, just over Landon Lewis. Moved Lewis up the track just a little bit in turns 3 and 4, and that was what made the difference. These two, from the moment they took the green flag with 2 laps to go, they were side by side and never gave that up. They were fender to fender, wheel to wheel for those entire 2 laps, beating on each other until turns 3 and 4 when Finch moved Lewis up the track just a little bit and ensured himself that victory in that 20 car. I mean, he had dominated the race, so I don't really see an issue with that. Just good hard racing, led 89 laps. Jake Finch deserved this win, so great to see Jake Finch pick up his first win. Now, you might recognize that name Finch. If it is a little bit familiar to you, but you're not sure where you've heard that name, James Finch, former owner of Phoenix Racing in both NASCAR and ARCA. That is his son. So already making a name for himself now in the ARCA Menards series. Landon Lewis did land in the 2nd position, though, with Luke Fenhaus in 3rd, William Sawalich 4th, LeVar Scott rounded out the top 5. Great run for Zachary Tinkle after starting in 2nd, still able to come home with a 6th place finish. And I want to give a shout out to Toni Breidinger. I have been extremely hard on her in the past. She's run 2 very good races this year. Phoenix was a good race for her, and unfortunately couldn't finish it off with a late race wreck that I don't believe was of her doing. And in this one, another issue that really was not of her doing. She was running 4th at the time of the Connor Jones caution with 10 laps to go. And unfortunately, under that caution, the car stalled and wouldn't go. I never saw a reason for why that happened. There may be a reason out by now by the time of this recording that I just haven't seen yet, but I have not seen a reason as to why that happened. Did only drop her to 7th due to the amount of cars that were not on the lead lap. So didn't fall that far in the running order, but still very unfortunate that Toni was not able to finish off that good run that she had going. And like I said, I've been hard on her in the past, but I want to give credit where credit is due. She seems to be slightly turning the corner this season. I have been impressed with the improvements that I've seen out of her this year, and I'm curious to see if she can keep that going for the rest of the year. Ed Pompa, Connor Jones, and Sean Hingorani rounded out the rest of the top 10 in this race. So that's your results from the General Tire 125, or should we call it the General Tire 127 now, since we went those 2 laps over? Either way, let's take a look at your point standings for the East Series. 2 races into the season. I know it's only 2 races in, but at the same time, there's not a lot of races on this schedule, so 2 races in, you're still already kind of into the championship thick of things, with William Sawalich being your points leader now after 2 races. Not surprising after he won at Pensacola, finished 4th here. Shouldn't be surprising he is the points leader, but Jake Finch really cut into that lead, leaving Dover now only 2 points behind William Sawalich. Luke Fenhaus sits in 3rd, -8. LeVar Scott in 4th, -12. And Zachary Tinkle, top 5 in the points. Shout out to Zachary Tinkle. Good start to the season for him in the East. 16 points off of the lead. And you see Sean Hingorani also there. He dropped a lot with that 10th place finish. Back to the 6th position, 17 points off of the lead. He has got quite the hole to dig out of. Not the points gap that he has in the West Series, that is for sure. That's your point standings following Dover, and I believe that will do it for us on this week's ARCA Rewind show. Unfortunately, not going to have time to do an Xfinity Rewind for you this week, but we will have a Rookie Stripes podcast coming up. I believe that will be on Tuesday this week for the video version, so keep an eye out for that. Tuesday should be 6 p.m. Eastern, so it'll be a day earlier than it has been in the past, and I believe the audio version probably will come out on Monday morning as well. So keep an eye out for those if you are interested in that. And that is what the next week looks like. And then we move on to Kansas next weekend, main ARCA for that. And then, of course, Xfinity and Cup there as well. So lots happening for you next weekend as well. Should be able to, at the very least, do an ARCA Rewind next weekend, if not an Xfinity Rewind as well. So keep an eye out for all of that, and hope y'all have a great week, and we'll see you here in a couple days for the Rookie Stripes podcast. This has been the ARCA Menards Series Rewind Show. I'm Garth Allen for Racing News Now.